So, welcome to this week's Village Torah. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Ekev. It's the third Torah portion in the book of Deuteronomy. And last week, led by Edie, our Jewish Foundation Fellow, she spoke about the very first paragraph of the Shema, which appeared in last week's Torah portion. And serendipitously, the second paragraph appears in this week's Parsha. So, what else am I going to speak about? There are plenty of things I could pluck out of this week's Torah portion, but I'm going to tackle the second paragraph of the Shema. Now, the second paragraph of the Shema has a lot of similarities with the first paragraph. They're very many similarities, and it's easy to compare, and that also lends opportunities for contrasts as well. So I'm going to screen share. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. So I'm not trying to scare anybody off with the Hebrew, but I'm just going to show the Hebrew first and move to the English. So we have the Hebrew here. You can see a little bit of the similarities, the differences. If anybody's interested in the Hebrew, it's there, but we're going to move on to the English. So we have, and this is next page. Okay. So we have from last week, some of this may look familiar, and then which is from chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, and then this week we have chapter 11, and there are some similarities. It talks about, in this week's Parsha, if you obey the commandments with which I charge you this day, and we get very similar to last week. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. Similar. We also have this pressing these words upon your heart, right? Similar to last week. We have teach them to your children, recite them when you're at home, when you're on the way, when you lie down, when you get up. And we also have the mezuzah section, as it were, inscribing them on the mezuzos, beisecha, on the passageways of your house and on your gates. So there's a whole bunch that's strikingly similar to the first paragraph of the Shema that appears in last week's Torah portion. Now, there are some differences here and there between the first paragraph of the Shema and the second paragraph of the Shema and what I just showed, but there are a strong amount of similarities. Now, there are also pieces in this week, in the second paragraph of the Shema that appear in this week's Torah portion that are not found in last week's text of the Shema. Do you have any questions so far?
No, I understand.
Great. Okay. So now we're going to pick up okay, so this is the middle part. So there's these four verses that we have in this week's Parsha, that in this week's Torah portion, that were not in last week's Torah portion, in the middle of the second paragraph of the Shema, that are not found in the middle of the first paragraph of the Shema. And it's really, if I had to sum it all up, I would say it's an agricultural reward and punishment system. Basically, if one does the things that's mentioned in the first part of the first and second paragraphs of the Shema, then I will grant you rain for your land in season, the early rain, the late rain. You shall gather in your new grain, your new wine, your new oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus shall you eat your fill. It sounds really great. You're going to have really great agricultural production. You'll be fed well. You'll be able to sell it. You'll be able to get good goods. And then it says, take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them, because not good stuff will happen. The Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the skies so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and soon you will perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning to you. So that it's really clear. Follow these things, listen to the words that here it's Moses, but Moses is telling, listen to God's words, and you're going to get good stuff. Agricultural, good produce. If you don't turn to the other gods, especially the gods that the Canaanites are already worshiping, bad stuff's going to happen. God's going to be really jealous, really bad stuff. It's an interesting insertion, and yet it really tracks well with a lot of what else we see really in the book of Deuteronomy. It really is part of this overarching theme that runs throughout the book of Deuteronomy of if you do good stuff, it specifically,
you do good stuff.
What?
If you do well by God's rules, you get good stuff. If you mess up and don't do good by God's rule, then you get punished.
Exactly.
Right?
Precisely. And
right.
The theme that runs throughout, I think we also see it towards the end. I mean, we do see it towards the end. I don't remember which chapter number. I want to say like 28 in the book of Deuteronomy, but it's a huge expansion of all the various good things that can happen, and then all the various bad things can happen. And it really is this system of divine reward and punishment, and very specifically here it's more oriented in an agricultural fashion. Okay, so this is a huge insertion here. Now,
Rabbi.
Yes. Yeah.
That would only be a agricultural issue because that was the times. Now, bring it up to today's time.
Mm-hmm.
How would you put it in, what would God be taking or doing against his people if they did not follow his commandments?
Well, if let's do this 28. So I will say in this very specific context, it is actually dealing with the. Here, I'm going to pull this up. Okay. Here, I'm going to start answering, and then I'm going to continue to something else. So the quick answer is that I'm going to go narrow and then go broad. So, and then I'm going to go, and then the third piece of it, I'm going to more directly answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
Our second paragraph here of the Shema and the specific insertion that we get that's not in the first paragraph of the Shema is specifically agricultural reward and punishment. More broadly, I mentioned at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, we do see a lot more expanded sets of reward and punishment. So here on screen, I have Deuteronomy chapter 28. Now here, it starts off, it's actually interesting. The first three words are the exact same three words that we see in what we have here in the second paragraph of the Shema, V'haya im shamoah, if you obey the Lord God, if you're listening to the Lord God. And it's talking about following the commandments. Now here it goes a lot more expansive than simply agricultural. It talks about all these blessings. If you listen to the Lord your God, you will be blessed both in the city and in the country. Although the Hebrew is actually more, not necessarily the country, but the field, right? Field being more agricultural, but city being more commercially oriented, market and so forth. And then blessed will be the issue of your womb. So now it's like your own production, not necessarily, and then also about your production of your fauna, of your livestock. Blessed will be your basket, your kneading bowl, your comings, your goings, and that could be a lot more expansive than simply agriculture. And even when you fight your enemies, they're going to run away from you. Blessings in your barns, all your undertakings. Basically, and the peoples of the earth shall see the Lord's name is proclaimed over you. They shall stand in fear of you. All these really great things. Make you the head, not the tail. You'll be at the top, not the bottom. If you obey and faithfully observe the commandments of the Lord God that I enjoin you and do not deviate, yada, yada, yada. Now, the flip side in that in chapter 28 is if you go against God, then you'll be cursed both in the city and in your fields. And your basking, your kneading bowl. And basically, it's the flip side of the very first part of chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. So here in our Torah portion, and here in the second paragraph of the Shema is really a very limited agricultural reward and punishment, but in chapter 28, it's much more expanded. And we see that actually throughout the book of Deuteronomy, where we have a lot of agricultural, I almost want to call them like little just reminders throughout. And then what we see in 28 is it's the full expression of the articulation of the range of the curses and the blessings. So now to more fully answer your question, Dev, which is, what about contemporary times? Well, I think that chapter 28 really speaks to a more expansive notion, not just a limited agricultural set of rewards and punishments, but in everything, all financial and commercial endeavors, but even reproductive endeavors of our own and not just of our cattle. So, great question. And it's interesting in thinking about what the book of Deuteronomy in a larger sense wants us to understand about rewards and punishment, especially in a relationship to doing commandments and mitzvot. Certainly, chapter 28 is a full expression. When we say it in the second paragraph of the Shema, I think, it's interesting. I think when we say it morning and evening, I think it's a sense that it's like an abbreviation, like almost like a mnemonic device, like a reminder to us that there is this broader divine reward and punishment system, and yet we don't have to go through the entire thing like chapter 28. It's just lengthy and huge. But what we say here from the 11th chapter of Deuteronomy is a lot easier to remember and to recite. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I know that was probably a much longer answer than you were expecting, but yeah.
What then, like for instance, let's take this COVID epidemic. Is God punishing the peoples or all peoples for the transgressions that they have either done consciously or unconsciously?
Great question. So one of the interesting things is that there is what we see in Deuteronomy, throughout the book of Deuteronomy, like I mentioned in chapter 11, chapter 28, and elsewhere in Deuteronomy, is there is a very black and white rewards and punishment system, right? Very clear, very black and white, no gray. I think as anybody who has lived life knows, life is full of gray. Shades of gray all around, they abound. And something also that we've realized in life, I think any of us who live life realizes, yeah, things can happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, but bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. And so life is actually not black and white. It's incredibly messy and tangled and gray. So how to deal with that? So the rabbis talk about it, but it's already dealt with to some degree in biblical literature because we have the book of Job. Now, I think most American Jews have never read the book of Job. It is it's an interesting book, but ultimately, what?
I like it very much.
You like it? Yeah?
Oh, yeah, I've read it. I know it very well.
What do you think of it?
I like the story of Job.
Yeah.
I enjoy it very much.
Oh, good.
Job stayed steadfast to God, and the lesson there is that when you are steadfast to God, then you're rewarded. Basically, right?
So there is that is a part of it. There's also a part of it where Job's having all these conversations with his friends, his neighbors, and they'll say, "You're suffering horrifically. Clearly, you must have done something wrong, right? You must have transgressed against God." And he says, and ultimately, what ends up happening is God comes out of the whirlwind and says, "Look, no one really knows how I operate. Was anybody there from the beginning of time when I created everything? No, you don't really know how I, the divine, really operate. You can only see sort of like maybe glimpses, but you really don't understand the inner workings and behind the scenes." And I think that's really the message that takes place, which is, sure, this very black and white setup that we have of divine reward and punishment in the book of Deuteronomy is really lovely and all. But the book of Job really comes and says a different message, which is that might work on some level, but ultimately it's a lot messier than that. And ultimately, we don't really know the inner divine workings of reward and punishment. So I think that's how the book of Job acts as an interesting, not only just contrast, but even as a counterbalance to the book of, which is idyllic, it sort of operates in the ideal world, but the book of Job operates in the actual world, right? This is actually how the world works, which is it's messy, and no one really, like, from a human perspective, we don't know how it operates. From a divine perspective, it's an entirely different matter that we don't have access to as humans, right? So the fancy term for this, when good things happen to bad people and vice versa, is theodicy. Is just trying to figure out, like, how does God work? And it's something that we're going to continually struggle with because we want to be able to make heads or tails of the world, and we're always going to struggle with it. That having been said, I think my response is, I think what the book of Deuteronomy sets out, and including in the second paragraph of the Shema, it sets out an ideal that this is something that we should be striving towards, good and hoping for good rewards, but knowing that things can be a lot messier like they are in the book of Job. So to answer your question about COVID, could people get contracting COVID-19? It's like the book of Job. He's afflicted with ailments. Bad stuff happens to him, but not because he's a bad person or does bad things. Life is a lot messier than we would like it to be.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Your questions are great. They're prompting me to go and make it a more fuller presentation.
Good.
Yes. All right. And we have also this interesting, I want to say, like, not necessarily end, but kind of like a concluding thing. Let's see. Where is it? Oh, here we go. So we have this addition at the end of what we have here in the second paragraph of the Shema that doesn't appear in the first paragraph of the Shema, which is this 21st verse, which is in order that you and your children's days, the land the land that the Lord swore to your forefathers, as long as there is a heaven over the earth. So really, I just love those last words, Kimei Hashemayim Haaretz. As many days as there are that the heavens will be over the earth, which is hopefully forever. But basically, the idea of doing these things, especially the latter verses, which were concerning, I'm going to switch over to that first window I showed, which was the comparison. So here it's all about the teaching, reciting, sharing these things, and ultimately binding them on the sign of your hand, let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, and do the mezuzahs and all these things, basically to remind us that we should remember to do the various the commandments of God, and that way it's interesting because there's no necessarily a reason ascribed in the first paragraph of the Shema, but here it's so that while they're while you are on the land that God gave to your forefathers, they can retain it. Now, I think it really functions more as it helps you remember to do these things and not fall into the trap of going and worshiping other gods and doing the bad things that, like we mentioned in not only here in our second paragraph of the Shema, but like I also mentioned in chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, where there's a much more expansive list and doing all these things. I think this is these little things, whether it's, I'm going to switch back to that other screen, and whether it's it's all these reminders. And that's really what we have in the first and the second paragraph of the Shema. Putting these words upon our hearts and our souls, binding them upon our hands, teaching to our children, and not just in certain places, but basically everywhere, both when we're at home, not at home, when we're lying down, when we're standing up. All these different things, different times that we're active, and that they're not just limited to a particular location or activity, that they remain with us. And that we both take them on our hands when we go, that we literally physically put them in houses on our doorways, and that also when we pass through, remind us that this is how we should be operating, acting, and living our lives as Jews, as children of Israel. So that's what's going on in, these are some of the, I just find these additions, these little changes, fascinating from that first paragraph to the second paragraph of the Shema. Of course, we have what we discussed in the first paragraph last week of the Shema, which is a lot of these teaching aspects. We also have the loving of God. I am just going to go on a little tangent, which is that first paragraph, the first few lines actually, which is loving your God with all your heart and your soul.
All your soul.
And your might. So what we have one difference here, I'm quickly going to go to the Hebrew, but one difference we have here, and then I can go back to the English, which is, I'm going to use blue. So one difference is in the Hebrew, we have, so loving, you shall love Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your, whatever the word is. So you have heart and soul. First, I'm going to now, so that we have this modecha. I'm now going to go to the English. So this will be a lot more broadly understandable. So, okay. What we have here is, and I'm not going to call it an extra word, but it's something different. So we shall love, what do we need to love God with? So we have, in this week's parsha, in the second paragraph of this Shema, it should be with all of our heart and all of our soul. Although it's funny because I like to think of the Hebrew here as not necessarily our heart, but our mind, and that the soul is really our body. Okay, that's how I like to think of it. Yes, and then here it's, of course, we get mind, we get body, but then we get this mode, which gets translated as might. And I'm going to do this. Drawing. Trying to figure this out. Okay, here we go. Soul, heart, might. Although, as I mentioned before, I really like to think of heart here as mind, soul as body, and then here, not really clear. Okay, so it's interesting because the Hebrew here for might literally means you're extra or you're very much, right? And if we were just to go with the second paragraph of the Shema that we have if we were just to go with the second paragraph of the Shema, which we have in this week's parsha, it's really simple. Your mind and your body. That's really all there is that one has, is their mind and their body. what was really fascinating is in last week's Torah portion, what's different is this third word, ma'odecha, your might, which almost sounds like it's not just simply a matter of mind and body, but also maybe some sort of expression, maybe some energy, something that's somehow untangible. It could be, I know the rabbis talk about financial might, right? What is this? Oh, what is the very much? Well, something that's beyond you, which is your money, and it's still part of you. It's still part of your abilities or powers, and yet it's not a part of you. So I find these aspects, this is one curious difference about this difference between last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha, in the first paragraph of the Shema and last. So those are some key differences. Do you have any questions?
No, I can understand that very clearly.
Okay, great.
You did a very good job of explaining it.
I appreciate that.
Really did. It's the truth.
Okay. So I think these are, this is something we say every day, morning, evening, and it's, who knows, maybe we'll do a series. I know I talked with you, Deb, maybe we'll do a series behind the prayers and talk about what the prayers are, how they got created, what their history of inclusion within.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Service. Yeah.
I would like to hear that.
Oh, great. And
that would be.
Yeah, so this is like a precursor. This is like a precursor to it, and exploring the Shema, the first two paragraphs, what they're composed of, what their components are, right, and how they're different and similar from each other.
Are the Orthodox services different than the Reform services?
The quick answer is yes. The larger answer is that there are a lot of similarities, and the Reform services originally, they originate from the same sort of base platform that the Orthodox services use, but there have been, especially in the last century, there have been a number of, removal of things from the prayer service, but also changes and additions, things relating to gender, right? There's been a lot of inclusion of feminine aspects. There's been a lot more, at least in America, a lot more English inserted. And there's been, and this is really all on one foot, this is really quick, but also Reform also usually remove the Musaf prayer from Shabbat and holidays, which is typically remains included in, I think, both conservative and Orthodox, definitely Orthodox, but even conservative remain Musaf for Shabbat and holiday prayers. So, but a lot of these, if we do this series, that would be really fascinating to
oh yeah,
explore.
I would enjoy that very much. Would you give us a syllabus?
Yeah, we could do that. That'd be really cool.
I would like a syllabus to follow through and be able to make notes in my iPad on it to be able to refer back.
Great.
I would very much enjoy that. What will we be doing next week at 3?
Next week's Torah portion. I haven't figured.
Okay. All right.
So
an offering of a different class would be at a different time. Okay.
Would you like to do a different time, or is this time good?
Oh no, next week at 3 would be fine. But I meant the other class that you were talking about offering. Would it be at a different time, or would we be talking about the same thing each week?
So we could do maybe 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, unless we do time on a Wednesday. I don't know what's good.
Okay.
Well, unless we experiment.
You decide.
We can stick to 3.
All right, 3 o'clock is fine. Next Monday at 3 then.
Yeah, we're sticking with the 3. For the month of August, we're sticking Monday, 3 p.m. for the Torah portion. We're going to remain there, 3 p.m. Mondays. All right, well, Deb, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. I enjoyed your efforts.